The crescent moon hung low over the Kanchari region, casting elongated shadows across the dusty border between Burkina Faso and Togo. Captain Amadou Moussaoure adjusted his night vision goggles and scanned the horizon for the third time in an hour. 23 years of military service had taught him to trust his instincts, and tonight, something felt wrong. "Sergeant," he whispered to his second-in-command, "how long since the last patrol report?" Sergeant Bukhari consulted his watch. 47 minutes, Captain. All quiet on sectors 7 through 12, but Captain Moussaoure's unease persisted. The border, usually a theater of predictable smuggling operations, cigarettes, small electronics, sometimes livestock, felt different tonight. The very air seemed to vibrate with anticipation. At 11:47 p.m., the radio crackled to life. "Border Command, this is Outpost Delta 7. We have movement. Large convoy approaching from the Togolese side. Over." Captain Moussaoure grabbed the handset. "Delta 7, this is Border Command. Define large convoy. Over. Sir, we count..." "Jesus Christ." "We count 47 vehicles. Repeat, 47 trucks in formation, moving at approximately 30 kilometers per hour toward checkpoint Kanchari 3. Over." The captain's blood ran cold. In his 2 decades of border duty, he had never encountered a convoy of this magnitude. Even the largest humanitarian convoys rarely exceeded 12 vehicles. Delta 7, maintain surveillance. Do not engage. Repeat, do not engage. We're calling this in. Over. Captain Moussaoure immediately contacted the presidential palace. Within minutes, he found himself speaking directly to President Ibrahim Traoré. "Captain, I need details." "Every single detail." The young president's voice was calm but sharp. "Mr. President, 47 trucks moving in tight formation. They're using the back roads, not the main commercial route. Intelligence suggests they claim to be carrying humanitarian aid, but humanitarian aid doesn't travel at midnight on smuggling routes," Traoré finished. "Captain, I want continuous surveillance. Do not let them out of your sight, but do not engage until I give the order. This convoy doesn't leave our territory." As President Traoré hung up, he stood alone in his office, staring out at the sleeping capital of Ouagadougou. At 35, he was one of Africa's youngest leaders, having risen to power through a military coup that promised to restore dignity to Burkina Faso. His instincts, sharpened by years of military intelligence work, were screaming that this was no ordinary smuggling operation. He immediately called General Ibrahim Zerbo, commander of Special Forces. "General, we have a situation. I'm sending you coordinates. I want your best team ready to move in 2 hours." "What are we dealing with, Mr. President?" 47 trucks claiming to carry humanitarian aid, moving at midnight along smuggling routes. "General, I have a feeling this is bigger than anything we've faced before." At 3:30 a.m., General Zerbo's special forces were in position. Hidden in the acacia trees lining the dirt road, 30 elite soldiers waited with the patience of predators. Above them, 2 military helicopters circled at high altitude, their rotors barely audible. Reconnaissance drones, gifts from friendly nations wary of Western influence, provided real-time intelligence. "All units, this is command." General Zerbo's voice crackled through encrypted communications. "Target convoy is 15 minutes out. Remember, we want prisoners, not martyrs. These trucks may contain answers we desperately need." Lieutenant Colonel Amado Kabore, leading the ground team, adjusted his position behind a termite mound. Through his scope, he could see dust clouds approaching, the herald of the mysterious convoy. At exactly 4:02 a.m., the first truck rounded the bend. What struck Lieutenant Colonel Kabore immediately was the professional nature of the operation. The trucks were evenly spaced, maintaining perfect intervals. The drivers showed no signs of fatigue despite traveling all night. This was no amateur smuggling ring. "Command, I have visual on lead vehicle. These guys look military. Copy that, Kabore." "Spring the trap!" Suddenly, the night exploded into action. Floodlights blazed from hidden positions, turning night into harsh day. The convoy screeched to a halt as armored vehicles blocked the road ahead and behind. Special Forces soldiers emerged from concealment like ghosts materializing from the darkness. "Stop! Burkina Faso militari! Exit your vehicles now!" Chaos erupted. Several drivers attempted to flee on foot, but they were quickly surrounded. Others raised their hands in surrender, their faces showing genuine terror. Within 12 minutes, all 47 drivers were in custody, secured with zip ties and under heavy guard. Lieutenant Colonel Cabore approached the first truck with a crowbar. The tarpaulin covering was professionally secured, too professional for humanitarian aid transport. As he cut the ties and pulled back the covering, what he saw made his blood freeze. Wooden crates marked with Cyrillic letters, metal boxes stamped with NATO symbols, and poking through torn humanitarian aid bags, the unmistakable silhouettes of automatic weapons. Command, you need to see this. These aren't medical supplies. General Zerbo climbed into the truck bed and began systematically opening crates. AK-47s, still in factory grease. M16 rifles with serial numbers that had been partially filed off. Hand grenades stacked like apples in a market. Rocket-propelled grenade launchers wrapped in protective plastic. Mother of God, the general whispered. Get the president on the line, now! 20 minutes later, President Traoré's helicopter touched down at the intercept site. As he walked among the trucks, each one revealing arsenals sufficient to arm hundreds of fighters, his face grew increasingly grim. General, what's the initial assessment? Sir, we've opened 15 trucks so far. Each one contains enough weapons to equip a full company. If all 47 are similar, he paused, calculating. We're looking at enough firepower to arm a division. Traoré pulled out his satellite phone and dialed his defense minister. General Sadu, I need you at the intercept site immediately. Bring Intelligence Chief Drago and the entire national security team. We're looking at something that could have started a civil war. As the sun rose over the Kanchari region, casting long shadows across the captured convoy, the interrogation began. The drivers, a mix of locals and foreign nationals, were separated into different groups. Most claimed ignorance, insisting they believed they were transporting agricultural equipment or construction materials, but Jean-Baptiste Compaoré, a 43-year-old driver from Bobo Dioulasso, seemed different. His nervous glances and trembling hands suggested he knew more than he was admitting. Intelligence Chief Commandant Issouf Drago, a soft-spoken man with sharp eyes, sat across from Compaoré in the improvised interrogation tent. Jean-Baptiste, I know you have children. 2 daughters and a son, if our records are correct. Beautiful family. Compaoré's eyes filled with tears. Please, I was just driving. I needed the money. Jean-Baptiste, we found your fingerprints on ammunition crates. You weren't just driving. You were loading and securing military-grade weapons. Now I can charge you as an accessory to terrorism, which carries a life sentence, or you can help us understand what's really happening here. The man broke down completely. They said it was farm equipment. Special equipment for a mining operation in Togo. They paid me 5 times my normal rate, said it was because of the night driving. Who is they, Jean-Baptiste? Monsieur François Bongo. He runs logistics for several big companies. He said the equipment was sensitive, that it needed to reach the port in Lomé without going through normal customs procedures. Drago leaned forward. Where were you supposed to deliver these weapons? Not weapons. Equipment! Compaoré protested, then caught himself. We were supposed to reach a warehouse complex outside Lomé. Then the cargo would be loaded onto a ship. What ship, Jean-Baptiste? I don't know. Monsieur François never told us those details. He just said our job was to deliver the cargo to the warehouse. But as the interrogation continued, more details emerged. The convoy had been assembled over 3 weeks, with trucks arriving from different routes. The drivers had been recruited separately, many through intermediaries who claimed to be organizing a major construction project. Most damning of all, Compaoré revealed that this was supposed to be the first of several convoys. Monsieur François said there would be more deliveries over the coming months. He said the project was very big, that it would bring many jobs to the region. By noon, the full scope of the seizure became clear. President Traoré stood in the makeshift command center as officials tallied the weapons cache. The numbers were staggering. $15,000, AK-47 assault rifles $5,000, M16 rifles $3.2 million rounds of ammunition 50,000 hand, grenades 1,500 rocket-propelled grenades 200, surface-to-air missiles 20, tons of plastic explosives 500 sniper, rifles 1,000 pistols and revolvers military, communication equipment, night vision devices, body armor, and tactical gear. Defense Minister General Sadhu Traoré stared at the inventory in disbelief. Mr. President, this is enough weapons to outfit a small army. Who needs this level of firepower? Someone planning to start a war, Traoré replied grimly. The question is, a war against whom? Intelligence Chief Drago approached with a tablet displaying preliminary analysis. Sir, we've been examining serial numbers. These weapons come from diverse sources, some from Eastern European surplus, others from active NATO stockpiles. Several rocket launchers were manufactured in the past 6 months. Meaning someone with significant resources and connections assembled this arsenal specifically for an operation in West Africa. This wasn't opportunistic arms dealing. This was procurement for a planned military action. Interior Minister Ousmane Kanazoe, who had arrived from the capital, studied satellite imagery of the interception site. Mr. President, if these weapons had reached their intended destination, Burkina Faso could have faced a civil war that would make Libya look peaceful, Traoré finished. Minister, I want every security agency on high alert. Cancel all leave. Double security at government buildings and military installations. As the second day of interrogations began, a clearer picture emerged. Under pressure from skilled interrogators, several drivers began revealing details about their recruitment and the operations organization. Musa Ouedraogo, a truck driver from Ouagadougou, provided the breakthrough information. The recruitment meeting was in a hotel in the capital. About 30 drivers were there. They showed us documents, said it was a multinational development project funded by international donors. Which donors? Drago pressed. They mentioned the European Union, some American foundation, and several private companies. But now that I think about it, the paperwork looked professional but somehow wrong. Wrong how? The logos were slightly off. The English had small mistakes. Like someone had copied real documents but made small errors. More concerning were the details about the convoy's intended route. Rather than heading directly to Lomé as initially claimed, the drivers revealed they were supposed to make stops at several locations within Burkina Faso itself. We had a list, admitted Amadou Traoré, no relation to the president. 3 warehouses in Ouagadougou, 2 in Bobo-Dioulasso, 1 in Koudougou. We were supposed to unload certain crates at each location before continuing to Togo. This revelation struck President Traoré like a physical blow. The weapons weren't being smuggled through Burkina Faso, they were being smuggled into it. Get me the locations of those warehouses, he ordered. I want simultaneous raids within 6 hours. At 4 a.m. on the 3rd day, Ouagadougou awakened to the sound of military helicopters. In a coordinated operation involving 200 Special Forces soldiers, police tactical units, and intelligence operatives, 23 locations across the capital were simultaneously raided. The operation, codenamed Clean Sweep, uncovered a network that stunned even experienced intelligence officials. 17 of the 23 locations contained weapons caches, some hidden in legitimate businesses, others in abandoned warehouses on the city's outskirts. At a furniture workshop in the Gungan district, soldiers discovered AK-47s hidden inside sofa frames. A medical supply company in Ouaga 2000 had rocket launchers concealed behind boxes of legitimate pharmaceuticals. Most shocking of all, a youth center funded by international NGOs had a basement armory containing enough explosives to level a city block. The arrests were equally revealing. Among those detained were former Defense Minister Colonel Jean-Claude Bouda, dismissed 2 years earlier for corruption, businessman François Bongo, the same man mentioned by the drivers, retired General Augustin, Ouagadougou 3 foreign nationals with diplomatic passports, several prominent opposition figures, 2 local media owners known for criticizing the government, but the most significant arrest occurred at a luxury villa in the Ouaga 2000 district. As special forces breached the compound, they discovered former finance minister Dr. Ablassé Ouedraogo in the midst of destroying documents. Among the papers they recovered were communications that would rock the nation. In the secure interrogation facility at the presidency, Dr. Ouedraogo initially maintained his innocence, claiming he was merely a businessman wrongfully targeted for his political opposition to President Traoré. But when confronted with the recovered documents, including bank transfers, coded communications, and detailed operational plans, His composure cracked. "You don't understand," he said, tears streaming down his face. The country was heading toward disaster under Traoré. Someone had to save Burkina Faso from his radical policies. Intelligence Chief Drago leaned across the table. "Save it how, Doctor? By importing enough weapons to start a civil war? It wasn't supposed to be a civil war. It was supposed to be a quick transition, minimal casualties, a return to democratic governance and partnership with the international community." Whose partnership, Doctor? The confession that followed would echo across Africa and beyond. Dr. Ouedraogo revealed that he had been approached 6 months earlier by representatives of what they called the West Africa Stability Initiative, a group claiming to represent concerned international stakeholders. They said Traoré's policies were destabilizing the region. His anti-French rhetoric, his partnerships with Russia and China, his support for other military leaders in Mali and Niger, they said it was creating a domino effect that threatened regional security. Who specifically approached you? There were several meetings, some in Accra, others in Abidjan. The lead coordinator was a man named Henri Dubois, claimed to be with a French development agency. But there were Americans too, and even some people who said they represented EU security interests. The plan, as Ouedraogo described it, was methodical and chilling. Phase 1 involved importing weapons and distributing them to trained cells throughout urban areas. Phase 2 would see coordinated terrorist attacks designed to create panic and turn the population against the government. Phase 3 involved opposition groups declaring a national emergency and calling for military intervention to restore order. Who would lead this new government? A civilian military transition council. I was supposed to be the interim president until new elections could be organized. Elections that would bring pro-Western candidates to power? Ouedraogo nodded miserably. They said it was the only way to prevent Burkina Faso from becoming another failed state like Mali or Niger. President Traoré faced one of the most difficult decisions of his presidency: how to reveal this conspiracy to the world without triggering the very instability the plotters had hoped to exploit. He convened an emergency session of his National Security Council. Defense Minister Traoré was furious, pacing the conference room as he spoke. "Mr. President, we have concrete evidence of foreign interference in our internal affairs. This is an act of war disguised as humanitarian concern." "Calm yourself, General," Traoré replied. "Yes, we have evidence. The question is how to use it effectively without playing into their hands." Foreign Minister Olivia Ruamba, one of the few women in the senior government, offered a different perspective. "Mr. President, if we go public with accusations against Western powers without irrefutable proof, we risk international isolation. Our economy depends on foreign investment and aid, intelligence." Chief Drago spread documents across the table. "The proof is here, Madam Minister. Bank transfers from shell companies registered in Luxembourg and the Cayman Islands. Communications between conspirators and foreign handlers. Even audio recordings from Dr. Ouedraogo's phone that we've been monitoring for months. But will the international community accept this evidence? Or will they claim it's fabricated by an authoritarian government seeking to justify repression?" Ruamba countered. President Traoré stood and walked to the window overlooking the capital. In the distance, he could see the markets coming to life, children walking to school, the ordinary business of a functioning society. All of it could have been destroyed by the conspiracy they had uncovered. "We tell the truth," he decided. "All of it. But we do it strategically. First, we inform our allies, particularly other African leaders who may face similar threats. Then we present the evidence to international media and let the facts speak for themselves." Within hours, secure communications were flowing between Ouagadougou and other African capitals. The response was swift and unified. From Bamako, Mali's Colonel Assimi Goïta sent an encrypted message. "Brother Traoré, we have suspected similar activities in our territory. Our intelligence services will coordinate with yours immediately." Niger's General Abdourahmane Chiani was more direct. "The same foreign agents who approached your conspirators have been active here. We are conducting our own investigation and will share findings. Chad's transitional leader, General Mahamat, Deby offered military assistance. If you need additional security forces to maintain stability during this crisis, Chad stands ready to assist." But perhaps the most significant response came from South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa, representing the African Union's current chairmanship. Brother Traoré, this conspiracy appears to be part of a broader pattern of destabilization attempts across the continent. The African Union will convene an emergency session to address these threats collectively. The continental response went beyond diplomatic support. Intelligence sharing revealed that similar weapons smuggling operations had been detected in Mali, Niger, and even Ghana. The pattern was clear. Someone was systematically attempting to destabilize governments that had shown independence from Western influence. On the 5th day after the weapons seizure, President Traoré held a press conference that would be remembered as one of the most significant moments in modern African history. International journalists, many initially skeptical of claims about Western conspiracy, found themselves confronting evidence that was difficult to dismiss. The setting was dramatic but calculated. In the courtyard of the presidential palace, tables displayed some of the seized weapons alongside recovered documents. Behind President Traoré, a large screen would show intercepted communications, bank records, and video confessions from key conspirators. Ladies and gentlemen of the press, fellow Africans and concerned citizens of the world, Traoré began. 5 days ago, the armed forces of Burkina Faso intercepted 47 trucks carrying weapons of war disguised as humanitarian aid. What we discovered was not mere arms smuggling, but evidence of a coordinated attempt to destabilize our nation and others across West Africa. As he spoke, images flashed on the screen behind him, endless rows of assault rifles, crates of ammunition, surface-to-air missiles sophisticated enough to threaten civilian aircraft. The total value of these weapons exceeds $100 million, but their true cost would have been measured in thousands of lives, the lives of innocent Burkinabe citizens who would have suffered in the civil war. These weapons were meant to ignite. A CNN correspondent raised her hand. Mr. President, you've made serious allegations about foreign involvement. What proof do you have? Traoré nodded to an aide who began playing audio recordings. The voice of Dr. Ouedraogo filled the courtyard. Henri assured me that once the transition began, international recognition would come within weeks. The Americans are particularly eager to restore normal relations with a legitimate government in Ouagadougou. These recordings, Traoré continued, along with financial documents and communications we've recovered, paint a clear picture of foreign coordination and funding for this conspiracy. A BBC journalist pressed further. Mr. President, are you accusing specific Western governments of orchestrating this plot? I am sharing evidence and allowing you to draw your own conclusions. However, I will say this. The weapons came from NATO stockpiles. The financing flowed through Western financial institutions. The coordination meetings occurred in allied capitals. Make of that what you will. The most dramatic moment came when Francois Bongo, the logistics coordinator, appeared via video link from his detention cell. His confession, delivered through tears and barely suppressed terror, provided details that chilled the audience. They told us we were patriots, that we were saving our country from dictatorship. They promised that once the transition was complete, Burkina Faso would receive massive development aid and foreign investment. We would be heroes, not traitors. Who told you this? An interrogator's voice asked from off-camera. The coordinators. Henri Dubois, from what he said, was a French development agency. There was an American woman, Sarah something, claimed to be with a democracy promotion organization. A British man who said he was with an NGO focused on African governance. What were you told would happen to President Traoré? They said he would be arrested and tried for crimes against the state. If he surrendered peacefully, he might be allowed to live in exile. If not, Bongo trailed off, the implication clear. The international response to President Traoré's revelations was swift but polarized. Western governments, through their spokespeople, dismissed the evidence as fabricated propaganda designed to justify authoritarian crackdowns. However, their denials lacked conviction, particularly when confronted with specific details about weapons serial numbers and financial transfers. The French Foreign Ministry issued a carefully worded statement. France categorically denies any involvement in arms, trafficking, or political destabilization in Burkina Faso. We support democratic governance and peaceful transitions throughout West Africa. The U.S. State Department was similarly evasive. The United States does not interfere in the internal affairs of sovereign nations. We encourage all parties in Burkina Faso to pursue dialogue and peaceful resolution of political differences. But these official denials contrasted sharply with off-the-record comments from intelligence sources, some of whom confirmed that stability operations in West Africa had been under discussion in various Western capitals. More significantly, other evidence began emerging that corroborated Traoré's claims. WikiLeaks released diplomatic cables from 2023 showing European and American concerns about the contagion effect of military governments in West Africa. Investigative journalists traced some of the shell companies involved in weapons financing to addresses in London and Washington. Meanwhile, support for Burkina Faso's government solidified across much of the developing world. Russia's foreign minister called the weapons seizure clear evidence of Western attempts to destabilize sovereign African governments. China offered to provide security, assistance, and intelligence sharing to help combat future threats. Venezuela's President Nicolás Maduro went further, declaring President Traoré a new believer, leading Africa's fight against 21st century imperialism. Iran's supreme leader issued a rare statement on African affairs, condemning the arrogance of former colonial powers who refused to accept Africa's independence. The legal proceedings that followed were unprecedented in Burkina Faso's history. 23 defendants faced charges ranging from treason and conspiracy to arms trafficking and terrorism. The trials, conducted openly with international observers, provided a platform for revealing the full scope of the conspiracy. Dr. Ouedraogo's testimony proved particularly damaging to claims of Western innocence. Under oath, he described in detail his meetings with foreign handlers, the promises made for post-coup assistance, and the specific targeting of President Traoré's government for its independent foreign policy. They were very specific about what they wanted, he testified. Burkina Faso had to end its military cooperation with Russia, expel Chinese mining companies, and return to partnership with traditional allies. The military leaders in Mali and Niger were also to be isolated. The trials also revealed the sophisticated nature of the plot. Communication had occurred through encrypted channels managed by foreign intelligence services. Financial transfers had been structured to avoid detection by international banking monitors. Even the weapons procurement had been designed to be untraceable, using surplus stocks from multiple sources. But President Traoré surprised many observers by announcing that justice would be accompanied by mercy. Our goal is not revenge, but national healing and continental awakening. Those who genuinely repent and provide full cooperation will receive reduced sentences. This approach proved effective. Several mid-level conspirators provided additional intelligence about similar operations being planned in other countries. The information they shared helped Mali and Niger identify and arrest their own networks of potential collaborators. 2 weeks after the weapons seizure, President Traoré announced a symbolic transformation that captured international attention. In Independence Square, before tens of thousands of citizens, a giant furnace was constructed to begin melting down the seized weapons. Today, he declared to the cheering crowd, we transform instruments of death into tools of life. The metal from these weapons will become part of schools, hospitals, and infrastructure projects. Our children will learn in classrooms built from melted AK-47s. Our sick will be healed in hospitals constructed from repurposed ammunition. The ceremony was both practical and symbolic. As weapons were fed into the furnace, children from Ouagadougou's schools sang traditional songs of peace and unity. Women's groups performed dances celebrating life and fertility. Traditional leaders offered prayers for continued protection of the nation. The first item cast from the melted weapons was a school bell, exactly as Traoré had promised. Every morning when our children hear this bell call them to education, they will hear the sound of peace triumphing over violence, of unity conquering division. International media coverage of the ceremony was extensive and largely positive. Even outlets that had initially been skeptical of Traoré's conspiracy claims found it difficult to criticize the transformation of weapons into educational infrastructure, the African development, Bank announced a special fund to support similar transformation projects across the continent. Several European peace organizations, embarrassed by their government's alleged involvement in the conspiracy, offered to fund additional school construction using the melted weapons metal, the weapons seizure, and its aftermath sparked what historians would later call the Second African Awakening, a continent-wide reassessment of foreign influence and domestic sovereignty. In Mali, Colonel Goita announced the discovery of similar weapons caches and the arrest of conspirators with foreign connections. The Kanchari seizure opened our eyes to threats we had not fully recognized, he declared. Niger's government revealed that the same shell companies involved in financing the Burkina Faso operation had been attempting to establish similar networks in Niamey. Several prominent opposition figures were arrested, and financial audits revealed suspicious foreign payments. Even in more stable countries, the reverberations were significant. Ghana's President Nana Akufo-Addo ordered a comprehensive review of security threats, while Senegal's Macky Sall called for enhanced intelligence sharing among ECOWAS members. The African Union took unprecedented action, establishing a continental early warning system specifically designed to detect foreign-sponsored destabilization attempts. South Africa's President Ramaphosa, despite his government's generally pro-Western orientation, supported the initiative. The sovereignty of African nations is not negotiable, he declared. Whether threats come from traditional rivals or supposed allies, Africa must be prepared to defend itself. The revelation of the conspiracy and its successful disruption had unexpected economic consequences. Several European and American companies, concerned about being associated with destabilization efforts, accelerated legitimate investment projects in Burkina Faso as a way of demonstrating good faith. Russian and Chinese companies, meanwhile, saw opportunities to expand their presence in West Africa. New mining agreements, infrastructure projects, and security cooperation arrangements followed in the wake of the crisis. President Traoré was careful to balance these opportunities with national interests. "We welcome all partners who respect our sovereignty and contribute to our development," he stated. "But never again will foreign powers be allowed to manipulate our internal affairs." The domestic impact was equally significant. The conspiracy's exposure created a national unity not seen since independence. Opposition parties that had not been involved in the plot joined government unity coalitions. Civil society organizations launched campaigns promoting national vigilance and continental solidarity. Youth groups, in particular, embraced the message of African self-determination. Universities across the continent established Kanchari studies programs examining foreign interference in African affairs. The anniversary of the weapons seizure became a continental holiday celebrating African sovereignty. 1 year after the weapons seizure, President Traoré stood again in Independence Square, this time before a crowd estimated at over 200,000 people. Behind him, the completed Kanchari Memorial School, built entirely from metal recovered from the seized weapons, gleamed in the afternoon sun. A year ago, our enemies sought to turn our strength against us, to make us destroy ourselves with imported violence, he reflected. Instead, their conspiracy became the foundation of our continental awakening. Africa today is stronger, more united, and more vigilant than it has been in generations. The statistics supported his optimism. Intelligence sharing among African governments had thwarted 12 additional destabilization attempts across the continent. Economic cooperation among previously isolated military governments had created new trade relationships and development partnerships. Most significantly, the exposure of foreign interference had sparked genuine democratic renewal in several countries. Citizens, aware that external powers sought to manipulate their political processes, became more engaged in governance and more skeptical of foreign-funded political activities. The schools built from melted weapons became symbols of transformation recognized worldwide. UNESCO designated the program a peace education initiative of global significance. The Nobel Committee, while not awarding its Peace Prize to President Traoré, cited the Kanchari transformation in its annual report on innovative approaches to conflict prevention. The impact of the Kanchari conspiracy extended far beyond political and diplomatic circles. In universities across Africa, a new generation of scholars emerged, dedicated to studying what they called neo-colonial security studies, the systematic analysis of foreign interference in African governance. Dr. Aminata Sawadogo, daughter of one of the arrested conspirators, became one of the most prominent voices in this field. Her transformation from the child of a traitor to a leading academic symbolized the broader healing occurring across Burkina Faso. My father was seduced by promises of Western support and prosperity, she explained during a lecture at the University of Ouagadougou. But what the conspirators offered was not prosperity, it was dependence. What President Traoré gave us instead was the most valuable gift possible, the courage to believe in ourselves. The Kanchari Memorial School became more than an educational institution. It evolved into a pilgrimage site for African leaders and intellectuals. Students from across the continent came to study in classrooms built from weapons, understanding viscerally the transformation from destruction to construction that their continent was undergoing. The school's curriculum, developed in consultation with educators from across Africa, emphasized critical thinking, continental history, and what educators called sovereignty studies, teaching young people to recognize and resist foreign manipulation while remaining open to beneficial international cooperation. The economic consequences of the Kanchari conspiracy's exposure proved as significant as its political impact. The seizure of weapons and revelation of foreign interference created what economists called the sovereignty premium, increased investment from countries and companies that respected African independence. China's Belt and Road Initiative expanded dramatically in West Africa, with new infrastructure projects that explicitly respected national sovereignty. Unlike previous foreign investments that came with political strings attached, these partnerships were structured as genuine collaborations between equals. Russian mining companies, previously marginal players in West African extractives, found new opportunities as governments sought to diversify away from traditional Western partners. The Wagner Group's activities in the region, initially controversial, were reframed as legitimate security assistance to governments facing foreign-sponsored destabilization. But perhaps most significantly, intra-African trade exploded. The shared experience of foreign interference created new trust relationships between previously suspicious governments. Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso established a joint military command and economic zone that became a model for continental integration. The Sahel Federation, as it came to be known, demonstrated that African solutions to African problems could be more effective than foreign interventions. Terrorism, which had plagued the region for decades, began declining as local governments coordinated their responses and eliminated foreign-backed destabilization efforts. President Traoré, speaking at the second anniversary of the African Continental Free Trade Area implementation, declared, "The Kanchari conspiracy taught us that our greatest enemy was not poverty or underdevelopment, but our own willingness to let others define our destiny. Once we reclaimed that right, everything else became possible." The cultural impact of the Kanchari conspiracy was perhaps its most profound legacy. Across Africa, artists, musicians, and writers began creating works that celebrated continental unity and African problem-solving. The Burkinabe musician, Samira Sawadogo, no relation to the academic or the conspirator, composed Kanchari Nights, a song that became an unofficial anthem of African resistance. Its lyrics, sung in French, English, Arabic, and local languages, told the story of weapons transformed into schools, of foreign plots defeated by African unity. In the darkness of Kanchari night, foreign wolves brought tools of fight, but our eagle eyes saw through their lies and turned their death into our light. The song's music video, filmed at the Kanchari Memorial School with children from across West Africa, was viewed over 100 million times and sparked similar cultural productions across the continent. Nollywood producers in Nigeria created the Kanchari Chronicles, a film series that dramatized the conspiracy and its aftermath. While taking creative liberties with the actual events, the films captured the emotional journey of a continent rediscovering its strength. Even fashion was influenced by the Kanchari legacy. African designers created clothing lines featuring motifs inspired by melted weapons transformed into tools of development. The Transformation collection became popular among young Africans who saw fashion as a way of expressing their continental pride and resistance to foreign manipulation. Despite the successes, the path forward was not without challenges. Foreign powers, chastened by the Conchari failure, began adopting more sophisticated approaches to influencing African politics. Cyber warfare became a particular concern. Instead of crude weapons smuggling, hostile actors began focusing on information warfare, social media manipulation, and economic coercion. The same intelligence networks that had detected the physical conspiracy had to evolve to combat digital threats. President Traoré established the Continental Cyber Defense Initiative, headquartered in Ouagadougou but serving all African nations. The facility, partly funded by melting down and selling additional seized weapons, became a center for training African cybersecurity experts and detecting foreign disinformation campaigns. They failed with guns and bullets, explained Colonel Amado Kabore, who had transitioned from special forces to cyber defense. Now they try with ones and zeros, but our vigilance remains the same. The initiative's first major success came just 18 months after Conchari, when it detected and disrupted a sophisticated social media campaign designed to incite ethnic violence in 3 different African countries. The operation was traced back to the same shell companies that had financed the original weapons conspiracy. Domestic challenges also emerged. Some opposition groups not involved in the original conspiracy complained that the government was using Conchari as an excuse to suppress legitimate dissent. International human rights organizations, many based in Western countries, echoed these concerns. President Traoré addressed these criticisms directly in a speech to the African Union. We must distinguish between legitimate opposition and foreign manipulation. Our doors remain open to any Burkinabe who loves this country and wants to improve it, but they remain closed to those who would sell our sovereignty for foreign gold. By the 3rd anniversary of the Conchari conspiracy, a new generation of African leaders had emerged, shaped by the lessons of that pivotal moment. Young politicians, civil society leaders, and military officers who had witnessed the foreign interference and its defeat brought new perspectives to governance. In Burkina Faso, Captain Sarah Compaoré, who had been a junior officer during the weapons seizure, was promoted to head the country's new Strategic Autonomy Institute. Her mission was to train the next generation of African leaders to recognize and resist foreign interference while building beneficial international partnerships. The Conchari generation understands something our predecessors sometimes forgot, she explained during a Continental Leadership Conference. True friendship between nations must be based on mutual respect, not patron-client relationships. Any partnership that requires us to surrender our decision-making authority is not a partnership at all. This new generation of leaders proved remarkably effective at balancing international relationships. They welcomed investment and cooperation from any country willing to respect African sovereignty, while firmly rejecting attempts at political manipulation. The results were remarkable. By 2027, 3 years after Conchari, West Africa had achieved its highest rates of economic growth in decades while simultaneously reducing foreign dependence. The region that had once been considered a playground for great power competition became a model of sovereign development. The long-term international consequences of the Conchari conspiracy continued to unfold years after the initial events. Several Western intelligence officials, their careers destroyed by the exposure of their involvement, published memoirs that confirmed many of President Traoré's initial claims. Operation Restore Democracy had indeed been a coordinated effort involving multiple Western intelligence agencies and foreign policy establishments. The goal had been to reverse what policymakers saw as a dangerous trend toward African independence in foreign policy and resource management. These revelations sparked domestic political crises in several Western countries. Parliamentary inquiries in France and the United Kingdom revealed the extent of illegal activities undertaken in the name of democracy promotion in Africa. Several high-ranking officials faced prosecution for violations of international law. The scandal contributed to a broader recalculation of Western policies toward Africa. The crude interventions of the early 21st century gave way to more respectful approaches, based on genuine partnership rather than paternalistic control. But the most significant change occurred within Africa itself. The continent that had for centuries been the object of others' ambitions finally became the subject of its own destiny. The African Union, strengthened by the shared experience of foreign interference, began operating as a genuine continental government rather than a diplomatic talking shop. Continental infrastructure projects, funded by African resources and built by African companies, began connecting the continent in ways that colonial borders had been designed to prevent. The dream of African unity, deferred for decades by foreign interference and domestic divisions, finally began to take tangible form. Behind the grand political narratives were countless personal stories of transformation and redemption. Jean-Baptiste Traoré, the truck driver whose confession had helped unravel the conspiracy, became a symbol of ordinary citizens choosing patriotism over foreign manipulation. After serving a reduced sentence in exchange for his cooperation, Traoré was hired by the Conchari Memorial School as a maintenance worker. Every day, as he cared for the building constructed from melted weapons, he was reminded of how close his country had come to civil war and how his choice to tell the truth had helped prevent disaster. "I was a simple driver who made a terrible mistake," he told visitors to the school. "But President Traoré and our country gave me a chance to help repair the damage. Now I make sure these classrooms stay beautiful so our children can learn in peace." Even some of the foreign nationals involved in the conspiracy experienced transformation. Sarah Mitchell, the American democracy promotion specialist who had helped coordinate the operation, renounced her previous work and became a whistleblower, helping African governments identify and counter similar operations. "I thought I was serving freedom and democracy," she explained during a Truth and Reconciliation hearing in Ouagadougou, "but I was really serving empire and exploitation." The Conchari conspiracy wasn't about bringing democracy to Burkina Faso. It was about preventing African democracy, preventing Africans from choosing their own path. Her testimony, broadcast across Africa and beyond, helped delegitimize the entire framework of Western democracy promotion in Africa. African civil society organizations, strengthened by their resistance to foreign manipulation, proved more effective at promoting genuine democratic participation than any foreign-funded initiative. The economic transformation of Burkina Faso in the years following Conchari became a case study in development programs across the world. The country that had been targeted for destabilization, because of its resource wealth, became proof that African countries could manage those resources for their own benefit. The gold mines that had once been dominated by foreign companies were restructured as joint ventures with majority African ownership. The revenues, instead of flowing to foreign shareholders, funded infrastructure, education, and healthcare for the Burkinabe people. Cotton production, historically controlled by French companies, was reorganized under the Burkina Faso Cotton Cooperative, a farmer-owned organization that processed cotton locally and sold finished products directly to international markets. The value addition that had once occurred in European factories now happened in Burkinabe cities, creating thousands of jobs. Most symbolically, the uranium mines that had powered French nuclear reactors for decades were nationalized, and their output redirected to a new African nuclear cooperation program. Instead of enriching foreign powers, Burkinabe uranium would power electricity generation across West Africa. President Traoré, speaking at the dedication of the first African-owned uranium enrichment facility, declared, "For too long, our resources have been extracted to fuel other people's development while we remained in darkness. Today we light our own path with our own energy, under our own control." The economic success attracted attention from development experts worldwide, many of whom had to confront the uncomfortable reality that African countries could achieve more rapid development when freed from foreign interference than when subjected to outside assistance. 5 years after the Conchari conspiracy, the African Union took its most ambitious step yet, the drafting of a continental constitution that would transform the organization from a diplomatic forum into a genuine federation. the Constitution, largely inspired by the sovereignty principles that had emerged from the Conchari crisis, established clear protections against foreign interference while enabling enhanced African cooperation. Member states retained control over their internal affairs but agreed to coordinate foreign policy, defense, and economic development. President Traoré, despite his youth, was chosen to chair the Constitutional Convention. His moral authority, earned through the successful resistance to foreign manipulation, made him the natural leader of the Continental Unity movement. We gather not as representatives of artificial colonial borders, but as children of Africa writing the next chapter of our continental story, he declared at the convention's opening ceremony. The weapons they sent to divide us have been melted into schools. Now we forge the legal framework that will unite us permanently. The debates were intense, with representatives from 54 countries struggling to balance national sovereignty with continental unity. But the shared experience of foreign interference created common ground that had not existed in previous unity efforts. The final document, ratified by overwhelming majorities in national referenda across the continent, established the United States of Africa as a federal republic with significant powers delegated to a continental government while preserving local autonomy. The new federation's first president, elected by direct continental vote, was Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso. His acceptance speech, delivered simultaneously in English, French, Arabic, Portuguese, and Swahili, marked the beginning of a new era in African history. My fellow Africans, he declared, the weapons meant to destroy us have become the foundation of our unity. Today, we are no longer the victims of others' ambitions. Today, we are the architects of our own destiny. Today, Africa is truly free. As President Ibrahim Traoré prepared for sleep on the 5th anniversary of the Conchari conspiracy, he reflected on how a midnight weapons convoy had become the catalyst for Africa's complete transformation. The continent that had once been divided by colonial borders and neo-colonial manipulation had become a unified federation, capable of defending itself and determining its own future. The weapons seized that night had indeed transformed into tools of construction, not just physical infrastructure, but the very foundations of African unity and continental sovereignty. Children across the United States of Africa learned about the Conchari conspiracy in their federal history classes, understanding it as the moment when Africa stopped being the victim of others' schemes and began writing its own destiny. From his office in the new continental capital of Khartoum, chosen as a symbol of Africa's geographic and cultural unity, Traoré could see the lights of a prosperous, peaceful, and united continent. The Africa of ethnic conflicts, resource wars, and foreign manipulation had given way to the Africa of Thomas Sankara's dreams, truly independent, genuinely democratic, and authentically unified. The transformation was not without its challenges. Building continental unity while respecting local diversity required constant negotiation and compromise. Some regions still struggled with poverty and underdevelopment. External powers continued to probe for weaknesses in the continental defense, but the fundamental change was irreversible. The generation that had witnessed the Conchari conspiracy would never again accept foreign manipulation as normal. The institutions built from the lessons of that crisis, the Continental Intelligence Service, the Unified Defense Command, the sovereign development banks, ensured that Africa's resources would serve African development. In his final diary entry of the evening, Traoré wrote, "They sent us 47 trucks of death, thinking we would use them to destroy ourselves. Instead, we used them to build the United States of Africa. The greatest victory is not that we stopped their conspiracy, but that we used their attack to achieve what had eluded us for centuries: true unity, genuine independence, and lasting peace." Outside his window, the lights of Africa's cities stretched to the horizon: Ouagadougou, Bamako, Lagos, Accra, Kinshasa, Nairobi, Cairo, Johannesburg, all now connected by continental infrastructure, united by common values, and protected by shared strength. The Conchari conspiracy had failed spectacularly, but its failure had given birth to something its architects never could have imagined: an Africa that was not just awake and united, but permanently transformed into a global power that would shape the next century of human history. As the first light of dawn broke over the continent, it illuminated not just another day, but the continuing promise of an African Renaissance built on the transformed metal of weapons that were meant to divide, but had instead become the foundation of eternal unity. The conspiracy was over. The African Age had begun. The end.